Okay, we're back. Unfortunately, we had some technical difficulties for which we apologize. So I think we're going to basically kind of start at the top again. So again, I'm here with John McMillan, a PhD student at West Virginia University, where he's studying kind of Civil War era history under Dr. Jason Phillips. And John's going to orient us on the battlefield today and talk a bit about the preliminary movements that then preface the assaults they're going to kick off in this part of the field in the late afternoon of July the 2nd. Now, where we are positioned geographically, we're right off Confederate Avenue, which runs through the heart of the Gettysburg National Park. We're located along Seminary Ridge, and just for a moment before I turn it over to John, we're going to look off in the distance, and to my right, we see to the far end, Big Round Top. And as Pat pans slightly to the left, we can see Little Round Top, upon which there's some monumentation. To our foreground is the Sherfy Peach Orchard, the Emmitsburg Turnpike, and then finally off to my left is the Sherfy Farm. That's a distance, I would guess, 500-600 yards, John?
Yeah, I would say.
From where we stand, and then, John, bring it back here. And then beyond that, of course, is Cemetery Ridge, which is another kind of 600 yards beyond of where we are, so maybe 1,300 yards from our current position. But John's going to talk a bit today about Samuel Johnston, his reconnaissance, and how that in turn will start to shape the action on the afternoon of July the 2nd. So,
all right,
John.
Thanks, Jim. So yeah, I want to talk a little bit about Samuel Johnston's reconnaissance on the morning of July 2nd. Reconnaissance during the Civil War and all the way up through even today in the modern military is very important. The means, the ways you're doing this is obviously going to change throughout history. But during the Civil War, maps were a commodity, and so you couldn't convey all the information that you needed off a map. So an officer would send out somebody to do this, or multiple people in several different directions to do this. And this is what's going to happen at Gettysburg.
And maybe if I can just stop you there for a second, and I think this is a really important moment to pause and something to think about, because again, we tend not to think of this in the 21st century as we understand these fields so well. For many Civil War era officers, of course, this is unfamiliar ground. They have kind of bits and pieces of information that they've gotten through maybe spies and scouts in some instances, sympathetic civilian audiences in others, enslaved African Americans if they're down south, or it's kind of unfolding in real time for officers who have an understanding of the topography. So the roles these officers are going to play are absolutely critical in trying to understand the terrain and where the men are going to be positioned.
Right, correct. Yeah, and it kind of goes without saying how important this is, because the daily objectives of a campaign or the battle as it unfolds is going to be based on the information that these reconnaissance officers are going to give. So that's going to be important for these reconnaissance officers to be truthful and to be able to kind of clearly and concisely and exactly report back what they've seen and what they know and the information they're able to gather. So Robert E. Lee, for example, is going to do this in Mexico during the Southern Mexico campaigns under Winfield Scott, and he's going to do it extremely well. So on the morning of July 2nd, Robert E. Lee is going to send out Captain Samuel Johnston. Johnston had been trained as an engineer before the war. He was 30 years old in 1863. And throughout the war, he had a good record. He was a lieutenant, became a lieutenant in the 6th Virginia Cavalry in 1861. Then he served as a volunteer aide-de-camp for Jeb Stuart. And then after that, he's going to be assigned as an engineer to Longstreet's staff.
And as you've noted, he has a really stellar service record up to this
point
in time.
He's going to have a good service record. He had done these kind of things before the Gettysburg campaign. Longstreet is going to single him out in his reports during the Second Manassas campaign and during the Maryland campaign. And then at Fredericksburg, he's going to help place Confederate entrenchments. And then at Chancellorsville, he's also going to be able to gain information on Union Army wagons and camps and these type of things. So Johnston's going to be a proven reconnaissance officer. He's totally capable to go out and do what Lee has asked him to do on the morning of July 2nd. So he's going to be called around to Lee's headquarters before dawn on July 2nd. And he's going to be asked to do a reconnaissance on the enemy's left, which is going to be at the time, which they think doesn't extend as far as the two round tops that Jim pointed out earlier. And so Lee asked him to make the report and then to report back to him as soon as possible. And so Johnston is going to report after the war. He's going to write after the war that Lee never asked him to kind of find a route on which the Army could move around the enemy's left, but more or less just ascertain where the left flank of the enemy is.
And this is critical too, because of course flanks are going to expose essentially an enemy's the end of the line. So if you turn the flank during the Civil War period, that's critical to enveloping that line and trying to collapse it. So Lee's asking, has a pretty tall order here that he's asking.
Correct, yeah. So Johnston's going to set off. He's going to set off with Longstreet's senior, one of his engineering officers, John Graham Clark, and then he's going to have an escort of 3 or 4 men, and they're going to work their way from roughly in the vicinity of the Lutheran Seminary around down the Fairfield Road towards Black Horse Tavern. They're going to come down the Black Horse Tavern Road, which is kind of immediately behind the camera, kind of the direction me and Jim are facing.
To our west.
Yeah, to our west, west of Seminary Ridge. He's going to kind of run along Willoughby Run. He's going to cross the creek on the Black Horse Tavern Road, and he's going to come up on the Millerstown Road, and some of this is the exact route is unknown, but generally speaking, that's the direction he's going to come. He's going to come up on the top of Seminary Ridge, and he's going to be able to have this view basically that we have today with the round tops and the peach orchard and the Sherfy farm. And he's going to report back to Lee that he was able to work his way across Seminary Ridge, across the Emmitsburg Road, and on top of the round tops, where he said he had a commanding view, and that there were no federal troops anywhere in that area. As he does start to work his way back, he's going to run into some federal cavalry troopers in the road.
So Buford's men, I believe, if
yes,
it's early enough on the
so,
second.
Right, so Buford's men have moved to the south end of the field. He's going to encounter some of them. He's going to work his way slowly back to the seminary area, where he's going to report back to Lee in Longstreet's and A.P. Hill's presence, and he's going to be able to trace his route on a map that Lee has, that he worked his way to the south end of the field. There were no Federals in the area, and that he believes that he can guide Longstreet's corps there later in the day. And as we know, that's going to become the plan. Longstreet is going to move to the south end of the field. He's going to try to work up basically from south to north, generally speaking, astride the Emmitsburg Road, to try to roll up, as we talked about earlier, the left flank of the Union Army. So as Johnston's going to be assigned to guide McLaws and Hood's division, Longstreet's going to stay in the rear with Hood and kind of put the responsibility, you could say, onto Johnston to guide them there. And is when McLaws's division, who is first, pops out on Seminary Ridge, they're going to start to see Federals forming in the Peach Orchard, which is going to be Dan Sickles' corps that is, of course, moved forward. And Johnston's going to write after the war in a letter to McLaws that this is going to be the first time that he had seen Federals other than the cavalry troopers that morning in this vicinity. And so from there, that's going to be when McLaws and Hood are going to have to countermarch, and you get into all the controversies of is Longstreet dragging his foot or not, and then they're going to be able to redeploy and start their attack. So I think the important part of this, again, Jim talked about this, is how critical reconnaissance is during the Civil War, and how important the role of the natural environment, the geographic features, the terrain is, and how something like a small rise can greatly alter the way a battle plays out. And you see this time and again in various battlefields across the war. So.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, John. We really appreciate it. This is John's one segment, so I'm going to go ahead and shake your hand and thank you for your time today. And thank you all. We're going to start back in a couple minutes where we'll talk about Barksdale's Brigade and their assaults on the afternoon of July the 2nd. So thank you, and thanks to John.